Good morning, Metalheads here, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. And today we're looking at the latest album from Volbeat entitled Rewind, Replay, and Rebound. Volbeat is such a hit or miss band for me. I mean, generally speaking, their music is competently performed, and there's nothing inherently offensive or wrong about it. I would even stylistically consider it a breath of fresh air in the world of contemporary radio rock with their kind of rockabilly meets European metal sound. But man, when they hit it, they hit it. And other times when they fucking miss, they fucking miss. Take, for instance, Outlaw Gentlemen and Shady Ladies, which I don't just think is their best album. I think it's a legitimately really great, underrated rock album. It's a pretty inspired record, if we're being honest, telling stories of gunslingers and damsels in distress in the Wild West, using as many flavors of rock and roll as the band can muster without feeling forced, without feeling all over the place. Featuring a reinvigorated Rob Caggiano on guitar, some of the best licks and solos of his career on that record. And we're talking about a guy who spent almost 10 years with fucking Anthrax, thrash metal giants, guitar legends themselves. And they've always had really cool songs along the way too, you know, some really great headbanging numbers, some of which are actually pretty extreme and experimental for contemporary rock. Take, for instance, Evelyn featuring Napalm Death's Barney Greenway. But sometimes, man, but like I said, sometimes they miss, and sometimes they miss really fucking badly. Take, for instance, their last album, Seal the Deal and Let's Boogie, which I think I gave a 3.5 out of 5 at the time, but looking back, I don't remember a single fucking song from that record. Not one. Nothing stands out. Nothing. So with that in mind, it's hard what to know what to expect in terms of quality from a new Volbeat record. I mean, sound-wise, yeah, we expect rockabilly meets European metal, with some more diverse influences thrown into the mix as well. Sometimes they'll play around with more country stuff, sometimes they'll even play around with more poppy stuff. But typically speaking, we know the sound template, we know the formula, we just don't know if it's actually going to be any good this time around. And unfortunately, I would say that all the problems that I have with Volbeat's sound and track record kind of culminate on this record, because the entire thing is really hit and miss. You have some songs that are really good, really fun, really engaging, really different for contemporary rock, and other tracks that are boring, they're schlock, they're recycled. You can actually hear where Volbeat have not only ripped off other bands, but you can hear where they may have even ripped off themselves. And while I don't picture Volbeat fans being particularly upset with this album, I also don't really see anyone being that interested in it unless you already are a Volbeat fan, because I don't think there's enough consistently good material on here to recommend, and I don't think there's much on this record that you can get that you can't get on another Volbeat record that is frankly done way better. Let's talk about the good first. Like I said before, Volbeat is pretty good at crafting fun, engaging rock songs, and there are plenty of those to be found on here. One of my favorites being Die to Live, a collaboration with Clutch's Neil Fallon. It's raucous, it's simple, it's short, it's got a nice, livid Bruce Springsteen-style saxophone thrown into the mix as well. Neil Fallon sounds really great doing co-lead vocals on here too, adding a much more authentic rock and roll rasp to contrast the overproduced vocals that Volbeat normally throws your way, which we'll address later. I think The Awakening of Bonnie Parker is a cool track as well. It's one of the more inspired cuts on the record, with some Spanish music flares and a particularly invigorated Rob Caggiano on lead guitar. I also really like the kind of groove metal guitars that you can find in the track Everlasting near the end of the album. I think it's a little funkier for the band. It's a little bit more interesting and engaging. Gets the feet tapping, gets the head banging, nothing revolutionary, but again, it's good, simple fun. And even more generic and predictable cuts on the record, like Pelvis on Fire and Cheapside Sloggers, are still, you know, genuinely fun. I don't know how else to explain it. They're decent songs. The latter song actually has a collaboration with Gary Holt, who gets to play some more bluesier hard rock chops compared to the usual hellish thrash metal shtick, so that's cool to hear. That's something different for him. And then there's the bad. The bad comes in a couple forms. The first and most obvious is the one main problem I've had with every Volbeat record. The fucking vocals. They're so overproduced. I can handle a compressed sound mix. I can handle something that's super processed and squeaky clean, almost bubblegum squeaky clean, if you will. But I cannot handle these super overproduced, almost auto-tune-esque vocals. There's no need for this, and it creates a really glaring contrast when you have a really talented, authentic rock vocalist like Neil Fallon coming in and doing his own shtick. You know, it becomes blatantly obvious how much editing and processing is thrown into the vocals when he shows up. Maybe that's the reason there aren't as many vocal collaborations on this record as there have been on some others, you know? On other records, they've had incredibly dynamic and original, authentic singers show up all across the record, and here there's only one additional singer in the mix. It really blows my mind that you would have a sound so heavily rooted in classic old school rock and roll and rockabilly and country sounds, and you would add so much fucking shit on top of it to make it sound so processed and remove all the authenticity from it. And it's becoming particularly annoying on what, album number 8 or whatever we're on at this point? Like, and the second bad, they repeat themselves a lot on this record. Even some of their best cuts feel recycled from older records, the aforementioned Cheapside Sloggers. It honestly does remind me of a lot of older Volbeat songs. When We Were Kids is another example. It reminds me a lot of the opening track Pearl Heart from Outlaw Gentlemen and Shady Ladies. I mean, sure, it has a more symphonic bass to it, but that doesn't add a whole lot, particularly when the synths are so obviously fake. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you want to use synths, use them, but like, come on, it just adds to this lack of authenticity that I just mentioned, you know? And then there's the big offender, Last Day Under the Sun, which almost directly steals from two of rock's biggest names. You've got a riff almost identical to Don't Look Back from Boston, a fucking Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and a general vibe across the entire song and a chorus that immediately reminded me personally of Black or White from Michael fucking Jackson, the king of pop. Did you really try and steal from the king of pop and really think that nobody would notice? Like, I really hope that that's unintentional, because if it isn't, then holy shit, it displays a level of cluelessness that I never would have associated with Volbeat before now. And that brings us to the third and final problem I've had with this record. I mentioned that the earlier records had this problem, and now this record has this problem. It's too fucking long. It's bloated as fuck. You could get rid of half the fucking music on here, and you'd lose nothing. In fact, you'd automatically have a much tighter album. Like, there's just so many songs on here that aren't bad or incompetent or offensive, but they amount to nothing. Take, for instance, Parasite. Why is this track even here? It's 30 seconds of really dumb rock and roll generic riffing. Who gives a fuck? It needs to go. Even if it only shaves 30 seconds off, it needs to go. And all of this amounts to a record that, even in its best moments, is still way too long, really inconsistent, and really overproduced. So I'm going to give this thing a 2.5 out of 5. If you choose to muster through this album because you're just looking for some really simple, fun rock and roll, I do think you'll have a fun time. I do think there are legitimately some really good songs on here. The performances across the record, despite being as overproduced as they are still really good. They're still a really solid band, all things considered. But they clearly don't know how to edit their material particularly well, and they clearly need to step back into some more experimental and diverse territory, like what we heard on Outlaw Gentlemen and Shady Ladies. Like I said before, I don't picture Volbeat fans being upset. All of these problems have existed in one way or another on all of their other records. If you were willing to put up with them there, I don't see why you wouldn't put up with them here, especially when, again, there are still some pretty decent songs despite the nonsense. But there is still a lot of nonsense, and again, for that reason, I would not recommend this to anyone who isn't already sold on Volbeat as a band. They're still inherently more interesting than any number of contemporary radio bands out there. I would still much rather listen to these guys over like Skillet or Five Finger Death Punch any fucking day of the week. But clearly, if they want me to keep thinking that, they're gonna have to make some changes real fucking fast. 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. We're honestly this close to leaning into some lower scores, but I just don't have the energy. It just didn't piss me off to even go lower than a 2, frankly. So 2.5 out of 5, it's okay. And that is it For the Metal Mountain, I'm not an expert nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.